The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar, and thank you for joining me today. Just a quick check if everybody can hear me well. If you would like, then just type it in the chat session, please. And then I can start the presentation. We are still waiting for some to arrive. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So, okay, everybody can hear me well. That is just fantastic. As I said, welcome to this webinar. This webinar will be about business continuity and safe shutdown. And we all know why we need this extra information. Hopefully, I will be able to provide you some new insights because, as you know, that in this uncertain situation, we don't know the answers. It is impossible, and I will go through several aspects within this topic, and I try to cover as much as possible. Obviously, I can't give you all the answers, or I may not even be able to answer to your questions. I don't know. I try to answer to the questions, however, in the end. Today, Tracy Abrahart is with me, and she's helping me with addressing your questions. She will help me with that. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. However, if there is something that you would like to share with others, you can put it in the chat box. Feel free to do that. I won't be able to see your questions, but Tracy will help with that too. This is one webinar of many in the next couple of exactly next few weeks ahead of us that the IChemE Safety Centre runs, and you will hear about all the rest of the webinars that will be available. Right, let's just start. So that's me. I am your presenter today. My name is Susanna Gyenes, and many of you may know me. A little bit of a background about myself. Currently, I'm working as deputy to the director of the IChemE Safety Centre. Before that, I worked as a Seveso site inspector in Hungary, and also I did research in the European Commission's Joint Research Centre in Italy, where I did research on lessons learned from major accidents, publications on lessons learned, and also was involved in different technical working groups on the implementation of the Annex 1 of the new Seveso Directive, land use planning, accident scenarios, and so on. As I mentioned, this is part of a series of webinars that we are organizing, and our aim with those webinars are to help people and help really industries in professional development during these days about what we are experiencing now. What I would like to highlight here that this webinar is not about the virus, okay? This is basically, as we can say, this is a consequence of what happened, what's going on in the world. And this is just a kind reminder that we are not alone. We are together in this. And that's why it's important, I believe, that we share the most information that we have and we share ideas. So please feel free to share your ideas as well in the chat session, or either by email. Any type of communication is really, really helpful and really good if we can help with our expertise, with our knowledge, how to tackle the situation in our industries and in our daily life. This is not a commercial, but I wanted to show you this slide because when I was preparing the presentation, I thought, okay, why should I show this slide? And then I realized that I show this to you because you have to know that even if we are working in isolation, and even if we are working from home, the home office, we have to know that we are not alone. You are not left alone. So basically, you can still have a conversation with each other. And this is what I highly encourage you to do, because this is how you, and actually this is how we as a whole team can benefit from this weird situation, that we have, as you see here, also our supporting partners that we work together with. So I really wanted to show you this, that you know that we are not alone and we are not isolated, and then you can share your ideas and information. Now, coming to the point. So what are the challenges really? I try to put together some aspects that what we are dealing here with. It's certainly, this is uncertainty. That is the uncertainty around this situation, because there is no precedent in our life, basically, about that something similar happened. However, we have to just somehow try to figure out what to do, because we don't know the timing of the outbreak of this pandemic. That is uncertain. Uncertainty is really difficult to tackle. That for many people it's quite concerning. So also, because we don't know the timing, also implies uncertainty with temporary procedures and preparedness plan in place. Or you have to tackle in your industries all the employees that might be infected or may be very ill for up to 2 weeks or more if there are complications. So there is also the time periods that you have to remember that they are away from work, and it will also depend on their family and situation and recovery. And it can be really high, so that even like 40% of the employees over a period of 6 or 8 weeks can be absent from work. So that is a big challenge. And that leads to my second point here, that you have to operate, therefore, with limited number of people. How do you do that? I just trying to brainstorm here, really, because if you think about past procedures, you all have, I imagine, you all have in your work environment temporary procedures, emergency procedures in place, that you have to have something like a reduced number of staff related procedures that you can turn to and review those procedures, what could be applied in this situation, obviously adjusted to this current very specific time. So operating with limited number of people is the biggest challenge, and that you have to keep operation up to a minimum level necessary. And I will be talking about shutting down plants or units and stopping operations, but they may not be always the safest thing to do. They might not be the option. You have to consider it within your operation, because obviously I can't cover all types of industries, but you know better your industry. You know which unit and how and in what order. But I give you some hints about that. Maybe that will be useful. And then a very thorough analysis must take place as to which operation must or should be shut down, and which are the most hazardous ones that need continuous monitoring and operation. So that basically those are the ones that you simply cannot stop. So an action plan is really necessary or really handy, that prioritizes which of those are involved. And of course, hazard identification is necessary. And then you have another challenge here, because obviously we and you are experiencing it now, that there are certain products that are on low demand at the moment. If you see Sky Radar on the internet, or the NASA images, that you see that we have less and less flights, which means less demand on kerosene. And this is just one example, but you can give me more and more examples of what are the raw materials or products that are now not as on high demand as they normally would be. Of course, there is another aspect here, because if you remember Fukushima, I know that was a natural disaster and it had nothing to do with pandemic, but there are similarities. I just try to think out of the box to give some ideas. In that case, when you have to respond to an emergency situation, then you have to think about that, okay, you are, in this case, you are alone, because all the emergency teams, all the ambulance firefighters, they are now helping the society. They are in community, and they are, or they may not be available to help you. So this is something that you have to prepare for. In the case of Fukushima, for instance, that due to the earthquake and the tsunami, obviously municipal firefighters couldn't reach the site, or emergency response teams, or ambulance, because the roads were collapsed and all the critical infrastructures were down. And so then the site has to think about, with limited number of people in hand, plus an emergency situation, how do I tackle this? So this is just I'm pretty sure that most of you know this already. It's just a refresher reminder, basically. And then, of course, you have to, not have to, but you may think about having temporary operating procedures for this case, because hopefully it's not going to continue on a long term, but we don't know yet. But hopefully it will be just a temporary operation mode. And that brings me to the other challenge here, which is that you have to just think about training your people, those are that still at work, so that they know what is their capabilities and how they can contribute to the work. I will give you some further insights on that. So when you have this situation, then the minimum number of qualified workers who must be present at all times, that needs to ensure that safe operation of the facility is in place, and that you also have adequate number of adequate resources to tackle any emergency situation. And so that is that your capability that should be there. There is another topic here that I would like to highlight, because we have to think about that we are not independent, meaning that our industries belong to other industries or belong to other services. So when you operate a site, you are not isolated in per se. What do I mean by that? So you have to rely on other chemicals potentially in your operation. Not everybody, of course, but maybe that you do that. So, for instance, deliveries of like hydrogen, or if I think about, like, for nuclear, nitrogen, hydrogen, ammonia, or if in other cases like chlorine, other raw materials or intermediates that you don't produce, but you depend on other industries. So that is an impact on your sector. Dams, what do I mean by that? Electric power and grid stability, if you just think about it. As I mentioned earlier, other services that you may belong to, the firefighters, rescue team, emergency medical services that you may not be able to, which may not be able to help you in certain situations, but you depend on them. Electric power, grid stability, oil, natural gas, if it is required. So in terms of energy interdependency, let's talk about the basics as well, because we are all human. So food and agriculture, what is that? Food distribution and services. You have people inside, you have employees, and so that is also something that is important to think about, because we only function if we eat and drink. Obviously, it's basic, but excuse me, but it may need to be needed to be highlighted. Information technology, still cybersecurity is an utmost importance. So just not to forget about such events that may occur. So that is an ongoing activity. And this is from the nuclear guidance document that I put together the list because I thought it was really handy and really useful information. That reminds me that I may not have highlighted many guidance documents in the presentation, and it's because I had to put together everything piece by piece from different type of literature and my past experience. So, and you don't have such a guidebook. We wish we had one on how to tackle pandemic situations. So that would be really, really, really good. That is one that is close to it. That is the OECD guidance document on emergency response. I will send out the link if you are interested by email later on. It tackles some of the aspects. So coming back to the impact by other sectors, that postal and shipping, so daily deliveries of vital components and supplies, even just letters, documents, whatever information that arrives by post that you depend on. State and local health departments, hospitals and health clinics. Now this is really crucial here because, and this is really similar to what happened, for instance, in Bhopal, or what happened in Fukushima, or any large-scale accidents. And this is where you can take some information and learning points from, means that if you have overwhelming number of people in the hospital, like in now in this situation, that you may not be able to reach those hospitals. So there is a limit there. And this is a very massive dependency from that service in this case. Telecommunications are really, really overwhelmed, phone and internet connections. Sometimes you just experience this, that a break in the internet connection. And this is nowadays, this is the most number one priority way of communication, the internet. Everybody went online, all the businesses went online that could. So there is the overwhelming demand on those services. What about transportation? That you have movement of supplies to the plant and items from the plant, so that you have to organize logistics the best way possible with limited number of people, limited number of drivers, limited number of people at logistics companies and suppliers. So that is also something that that you have to keep in mind. And I'm pretty sure that most of you actually are keeping it in mind. As I said, I just dropped some ideas and just brainstorming here and try to highlight some of the aspects. And of course, such as food and agriculture, water is really, really necessary. If you think about just for human consumption, or if you think about like, yes, it comes from the nuclear guidance, but any other way of cooling systems as well as. So water is really something that we depend on. A little bit of what do we have to think about in terms of management of change in this situation? So the ability to run with a lower shift manning should be covered with the management of change request. I think it's not a surprise. And in current climates, excuse me, these still need to be risk assessed, but that may need to be performed by a team virtually. I've seen a conversation by email earlier within a group of process safety experts how to run HAZOP with a virtual team. I definitely don't go that details because I don't have the expertise to do that, but this is a new way of, and maybe it's not even new because a couple of them mentioned that they already run it virtually in really, really necessary, really, really rare cases. but still there is the virtual management of change procedure and risk assessment is now what might happen. So working in longer shifts and overwork due to shortage of personnel can result in fatigue. So the management of change should a little bit consider of shift changes. And also the chronic stress, because we all are stressed about this situation, obviously. So it gives an extra aspect to this whole area that we try to not just survive but go through as best as possible. And so in general, fatigue, let's talk about a little bit of fatigue, because that contributed to a lot of accidents in the past, and so that we can maybe potentially prevent any further accidents to occur in these really uncertain situations, that we understand that fatigue is generally considered to be a decline of in mental or physical performance. And mental performance now is that we are facing now mostly. And also physical performance, because of the longer shifts, impairs decision making, reduce motivation or interest in work, because everybody is concerned about their families, concerned about the future, concerned about the job. So that also contributes to this whole situation. And so adequate rest and recovery periods between individual shifts and following a series of consecutive shifts to ensure that fatigue and sleep deficit do not adversely impact upon performance is really, really important. And what about skills and competencies? I don't know if you have ever applied multi-skilling, but maybe it is something that could be considered. I don't know if it's a good experience or good practice, but maybe it is. So what I mean by that, it incorporates two levels, like skill broadening and cross skilling or dual skilling. So skill broadening is where minor elements and tasks are learned on top of the predominant activity, which is someone's major task in the operation. So expertise is maintained in the major task with additional elements to increase efficiency. For example, there's a mechanical engineer, and he or she may learn how to isolate and disconnect a motor to avoid the use of an electrician. So there are certain times when you have to, or you may think about combining or broadening the skills. The cross-skilling is where another major activity, so it's not a minor, but it's a major activity, is learned in addition to the main craft. And a person is considered competent. Competence is really, really, really a key here to carry out any activity in these two main disciplines. There is an example like a multi-skilled craftsman considered competent to carry out both mechanical and electrical tasks. Typically, some limits will be placed on the types of safety critical work that can be carried out. So with really, really precaution, but you may think about this option as well. To keep the risk of infection as minimal as possible, I've heard that many companies actually do not hire contract workers at this time. And so there is a lack of contractors. So there are processes requiring contract workers may be kept as minimum. And the range of infections will affect the number of personnel available for critical tasks, so that the minimum maximum required number of staff is also depending on this situation. But the lack of contractors, which is quite a significant number of contract workers are involved in many activities, especially maintenance and cleaning and so on. So they may be at a minimum number, so that we have to think about that when we talk about management of change. What else? Again, emergency response team. just a repetition, external resources may not be available, full stop. And so that you have to rely on your own personnel and make sure that even with minimum staff available, you can deal with emergencies or upsets in the system. What about shutdown of the processes? That is also topic of management of change. Personally, I think, and I hope that you sort of agree with me, that all departments, all affected departments should be involved in this assessment in terms of management of change. So, because I've heard that like production, they said, yeah, well, this should be on the emergency response team because this is an emergency situation, sort of. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. I don't know your opinion or your view on that, but I think that collectively a full team should be in place to assess all the changes related to the current situation. So all departments in the shutdown process should be involved. Organization of logistics. So even with reduced operation, some raw materials and products are necessary for the operation and required to transport on site. And that will also lead to supply chain, because if you think about that, if something fails and you don't have an extra equipment in place, that is also something to consider, because it takes time to get all those materials, equipment to the site. So maintaining safe operation should be ordered in time and assess the risk of delay in delivery as a result of reduced capacity of delivery companies. What about control room? That you have a reduced number of staff in the control room. How can they tackle the work there? Because they have limited access to all displays. So the design of control room, whether it is adequate to run with reduced number of staff, and of course personal distancing. So I don't go into the details about what NHS or your authorities, health authorities recommend, because you do it and follow all the procedures in your country based on what they recommend. It's not about that. It's just to think about also those aspects. Now, what are the challenges with staffing level? That you still have to continuously supervise of the process by skilled operators. So operators should be able to gather information and intervene when it is required. The challenge, of course, is whether the site has enough manpower to supervise all operations that is still ongoing, whether they have the staff level adequate. For instance, in case of 40 or 50% of the operators, or even more, are affected by the virus. Distractions, as answering phones, talking to people in the control room, administrative stuff or tasks, and nuisance alarms should be minimized to reduce the possibility of missing alarms. What are the possibilities that the operators can deal with all information in case of nuisance alarms or alarm floods, and how those occasions can be reduced to accommodate working conditions? And then, of course, I already mentioned overtime, so the workload, the mental or physical demands placed on a user by the task requirements, workplace and the environment, including the organization. Maybe you consider task and workload analysis. Additional information required for diagnosis and recovery should be accessible, correct, and intelligible. Whether there are additional operators to double check operating conditions to support control room operators. Do you have those field operators in place, or you have shortage of those too? Communication as a really, really key. but it is also in normal operation, so there is no secret around that. In this case, as I mentioned, the link between the control room operator and field should be reliable. For example, whether you have a backup communication system hardware that is not vulnerable to common cause failure, that should be provided where necessary. Preventive maintenance routines and regular operation of backup equipment are examples of arrangements to assure reliability. And as I mentioned earlier, since we all depend on somebody else's services, then you may have problem with the internet connection. You may experience issues with the landline phones or even mobile phone communication. So, and in some cases, obviously, it's not possible in terms of the fire hazards surrounded. And then staff required to assist in diagnosis and recovery should be available with sufficient time to attend when required. Operating staff should be allowed to concentrate on recovering the plant to safe state in case there is an emergency situation. So this is something that comes back to the emergency services, and it comes back to communicating with site security, and so on and so on. So these are the challenges with staff level. What else? I try to bring an example here that may be useful for you. Is that all resources available, the total number of available employees that could be appointed to the critical tasks should be determined, and in addition to that, the current number of personnel to be determined. Current number of personnel means number of employees who are healthy and are present at the critical operations, doing the critical tasks. And both actually should be evaluated on a daily basis. So you monitor the changes, monitor how many people you have, how many new people have been infected, how many people came back from there after their recovery. But I think that it comes automatically when you run your operation. There is no new thing about that. Or when you change your shifts from from shorter shifts to longer hours, longer shifts, and less shift turnarounds. So that is also. Let's see how to shut down safely. Now, before that, I'd like to address that it depends on the industry. It depends on the process. Depends on the type of operation that we talk about. Every site is different. Everybody shuts down in a different way. These are just questions that might help to realize or identify the areas. So which units to be shut down? Which are the units that you really must shut down, either because it is dangerous to operate with a reduced number of staff, or because there is a low demand on the product that is produced by that particular process or unit. And which are the ones that you need to operate because there is no other way, because it is safer to keep it operating than shutting it down. And plus, if you think about startups, now I will tackle this issue more thoroughly with presenting a couple of case studies in the next weeks ahead, running webinars on our lessons learned publication on the safety law. So I will go through all the published safety laws, all the case studies, and the first one is about startup accidents. So that startups are really among the most dangerous operations. So if you don't need to start up, then you just try to avoid it. So that's why an analysis of which units should be kept operating and which should be shut down, then this is something to consider. What is the minimum required staff to operate safely? And minimum number of staff that monitors, because that is also part of the story. And of course, again, sorry about the repetition, but it is really crucial that you have the minimum adequate number of emergency responders in case of an emergency, any kind of emergency. So what are the steps for shutdown? Let's go through these 4 elements. So planning, or when you have to strategize, the complete plan for a shutdown should include advanced preparation at the unit and preparation by other departments whose operations will be affected, such as other units or tank farms, pump houses, utilities, mechanical department, you name all of them. Before the shutdown occurs, managers should plan and strategize to maximize the event for efficiency, repairs and upgrades. And if the plant must be non-operational, take the advantage of this opportunity to address any necessary updates or repairs. Now, I've heard that a couple of operations follow the steps that, okay, even if the unit is shut down, then they take time now to do the maintenance or to prepare for further, or just review the documentations, review the procedures available, and like a housekeeping in this time. And this may be a good practice. You tell me, I don't know, but this is just an idea. So, and what about safety? Safety is first, as we know, and foremost priority in any plant shutdown. And just because the plant or the unit is no longer running, it doesn't mean that it's completely safe, as we all know that. It's crucial to be aware of particular safety concerns, including the chemicals involved. If you think about just runaway reactions, and so that you don't leave any materials necessarily in the tank. Just think about that example, or potential contamination hazards that could occur. Many other dangers or hazards that might be lurking in the plant. So it should be a really thorough safety assessment and monitoring. So during the shutdown, operating parameters should be monitored rigorously, because those are different parameters than the normal operating parameters. Efficiency and prioritization. What are the units or products that are not efficient to keep running until this whole crisis, if I may say that, crisis ends and it's over, and planning maintenance activities. Shutdowns, let's be honest, are really expensive and can greatly affect plant operators' bottom line. So that is really a consideration whether you really want to shut down certain units. And this is an example from the BP safety series, Safe Ups and Downs for Process Units, where there is an example how to shut down a refinery. So apologies from those who don't run or are not involved in refinery procedures or processes. This is an example that I found really, really handy. And just quickly going through it, because it is presented as an example, so that you do the cooling and the pressuring, and then the next step is pump out the material. You remove the residual hydrocarbons, also remove all the corrosive and poisonous materials from the system, disposal of water. After that, blinding and opening, removal of pyrophoric iron sulfide, and then finally is inspection for entering. This is really just going through on this example. And now, less technical, but also something that is important, that you have human factors. What are those human factors? From a practical perspective, the importance of communications between the shift team leader and how they respond in the short notice event that staff on the next shift are ill, which in current circumstances could mean all inside operators, outside operators, through to a worst case of all shift. So that is really a demand, and that impacts how humans actually respond to that particular situation. It is a mental demand. It is a physical demand, because then you have to think about how to organize the next shift. And shift changes is also one of the safety laws. So I will go into the details about those accidents when I will run those webinars. So most of the scenario planning will have considered short-term disruption, and probably not to the same level which we may experience in the coming upcoming weeks or months. We don't know that. So shift leaders should be provided with guidance on ongoing safe operation if asked to work double consecutive shifts. The other site services need to be considered as well, which will include utilities, fire services, security, and so on. So this is something that will impact workers and shifts performance, employees frustration level, and of course supervisor and management as well, because we are all human. We get frustrated when the plan is not adequate anymore, and you have to review the plan continuously and adapt to the new situation. And this is exhausting physically and mentally as well. And how hard do you have to work mentally and physically to accomplish the new level of performance? If you apply the multi-skill approach, then you have to have a performance and you have to have competency in other tasks, whether you perform well, whether you are able to perform in that particular task. How do you tackle that? How successful do you think that you were you are in performing the tasks? How satisfied can you be? And then how secure or insecure or discouraged or encouraged you feel? How irritated, how stressed you are? And these are coming from the NASA task load index. Excuse me. It is a multidimensional scale designed to obtain workload estimates from one or more people while they are performing a task or immediately afterwards. So these are the six. They have six subscales that represent somewhat independent clusters of variables, and these are these are five, but the six are mental, physical, and temporal demands, performance, frustration, and effort. Okay, if you are interested, then I will try to get you that extra information on this document. And my final point is the stress factors. Now, this slide I put together based on the OECD publication on emergency response that we put together in the OECD working group with the nuclear agency. And so that was based on high visibility chemical toxic release accidents. But there are certain aspects that we can use in this situation, I believe so. And that was an example of Bhopal. Now this is also something similar, so to a very, very big scale of toxic release. Like because not everybody is infected, but how do you know that if you are infected or you carry the virus? There is an uncertainty about that. And This is the lack of undisputed knowledge about the effects of this kind of infection, so that failure to adequately manage and communicate risk, for instance, maybe it happens. There is an uncertainty about housing and job, because everybody is worried about how the economy will survive this, how long and whether a recession occurs, and whether their jobs are in danger, whether people get furloughed or even just fired. Could be social rejection. That you can see it on social media, obviously, that those are who are infected, they may be avoided by other people because you are infected, then I avoid you, just other than the social distance, that they can be rejected. It is a thing, actually. Media siege. Now media has an incredible power, and it has an important role, not only in transmitting the news about what's happening, but also in shaping the issues of debate and in determining public perception of the pandemic, of the economical situation, of the climate change, of everything. So that is also a factor in this uncertain situation, and could be inadequate follow-up or compensation, delaying compensation for people who got affected or got fired, or delays in arguments, and so on and so on. That is not my role to address that. I just thought that it might be useful to highlight some of these factors. Now, this is what I wished to present to you today. I hope that I carried some important and useful information. Please just email us at the safetycenter@icheme.org email address, and please visit our website. Oh, okay, back a little bit. Visit our website, because we have all the guidance documents available for free, and we will put the webinars on our YouTube channel. You will find all the information about upcoming webinars on the LinkedIn site, and you can follow us also on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. So you can find us basically everywhere on social media, and I do hope that you enjoyed this session, and I'm looking forward to see you again in other webinars about the next 9 laws, safety laws, and those will be a little bit shorter, but quite intense, I have to say. So please, if you have any questions, just ask, and I can't promise that I will be able to answer, but I try. Just one more note. I will send all available guidance documents that the information about them that I used for this presentation, if you are interested. What I discovered is that the most available ones were nuclear, but they may be that I just missed a couple of the chemicals ones. So if you have any additional information that you wish to share with others, then feel free to do that as well. So, Tracy, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment, no.
All right. So thank you so much. If there is no question, please take your time. You can send questions even later on. There's no problem. We will check the emails. We keep operating. So thank you so much for your attention, and that you took time to listen to me. And I guess good evening for those are from the Southern Sphere, and there will be I will run the same webinar in the afternoon UK time. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.